Francesc Torres. I'm an artist from Barcelona. I started working in late 60s. I was originally a sculptor, then I left sculpture for conceptual art, and then I abandoned conceptual art for multimedia installation, which at the time was a practice that had just started, so it's like a first generation installation artist. And I've been in the States since 1972. Before that, I was in Paris. I left Spain very, very early, had just turned 19. And I went to Paris. I arrived there in 1967. I was there until 1969, so I'm a certifiable 68ard. And one thing that I had forgotten while I was away, while I was in Paris, was that there was something called the Spanish Army that wanted me to go back to Spain to, be a soldier. So I tried to avoid that. It wasn't successful. I was in the army still under Franco, which was quite an experience. I don't regret it, actually. It was interesting. But as soon as I was released and I could get my passport back, I came to the United States in 1972. So my career basically has materialized in the U.S., and I'm pretty much a product of being here. So what I do is, just to make it simple, is art that has an American format, if you will, but with European content. Multimedia installations are primarily narrative devices, and that has allowed me to work with content more than if I had been, more a formalistic, kind of artist, and deal with the things that really interest me, such as, history, political ideology. What is it that we do to each other, how we function, how we relate, but always in the social arena. So, but history primarily has been, the main course, so to speak. My relationship to NYU prior to being at the center was through friends that had been there, as students, or they were, they had a position in teaching. And one of them was Jim Fernandez, who was the one who actually invited me. And I'm not an academic, that's something that has to be remembered. Artists function differently when it comes to articulating knowledge. So when I first started, I knew that I had to do something. I had to justify my being there, obviously. So what I proposed was to do a workshop based on historical representation in the arts. The idea was that we were going to do a project, working together with the students, the people who signed up for the course. The subject that I chose was the role of the 100 African American men and women. There were a few of them too, that enlisted with the international brigades to fight in Spain. It ain't Ethiopia, but it will do. That was a famous thing that explained everything and that made it easy, for all this bunch of guys who were actually getting ready to go to Abyssinia, to fight against the Italians. But the war in Abyssinia ended earlier than expected, and that's when, look, there is another one that's starting, that was in Spain, and it ain't Ethiopia, but that will do. And I thought it was just phenomenal, my God. Number one, it hasn't really been approached, that I knew at the time. Nobody knows about that, and it's just a phenomenal story. So that will be the subject, and that's what we're going to do. Let's imagine that MoMA has asked us to to do a project for a big installation, dealing on this particular subject, and and that's what we did. When I arrived there, I already had a project that was very advanced, which was titled "Dark is the Room Where We Sleep." And it had to do with the exhumation of a common grave in Burgos, and where we found 144 bodies. I had wanted to do that for a long time, and the way it started was talking about the late 90s or mid 90s. I mean, I couldn't understand that, you go to the battlefields of World War I and World War II, both, in France and in Belgium, and everything is just, perfectly kept, with museums, centers of interpretation, making it easy for people to go there, and, I mean, just phenomenal, And as opposed to that, in Spain, you go to the Ebro River Valley, and you kick a rock, and you find something, and it's been like this since 1938. Practically nothing has been done. We still don't have a museum of the Spanish Civil War, for instance. And so just to make a long story short, we, with people from the university, the Central University in Barcelona, and the Rovira i Virgili in Tarragona, plus the University of Granada, who would help us if we needed any genetic, help and for analysis or whatever. With them, we found a place we were going to work with that, and first we were stopped by the Pujol government. Then there were elections 6 months later, something like this, and the left won. So we thought, oh, that's it, we got it. So we asked for, again, we did all the paperwork and everything, and the answer was no. So then is when I called the Association for the Recuperation of Historical Memory. I had become a member of Solidarity. And I said, well, this is what happens. I mean, it's totally impossible in Catalonia, to do something like this. And they said, well, we do have a campaign ready to go, but we don't have any money. So I have the money. So the 18th of July, to be precise, we started in Burgos rather than doing it, just around the corner from where I live. And so when I arrived at the center, I was in the middle of all this. That was presented in New York in 2007 in a context that I will never be thankful enough, because I didn't know what to do with that material. I had doubts if something like this could be turned into art, just and that I wasn't going to end up being exploitative without meaning to do that. So I went to ICP, with whom I had worked previously, and I said, well, I have this material and I don't know what to do. And they looked at it and they said, well, I think that, we do know what to do with that. And I told them that I didn't want to show them in an art museum necessarily. And he said, we're working on a big, another one, but this one, the definitive exhibition of Kappa, in which the ICP was going to acknowledge the possibility, basically recognizing that was the case, that the famous photograph of the Miliciano falling had been staged, which they never ever accepted that. And then the second was the first retrospective of Guerdataro, and the two shows were going to be done at the same time. They were shown at the same time, and said, and what you did, it serves us, to close the circle, because you photographed what they couldn't. So, and then when I walked out of that meeting with my knees kind of, faltering, because then all of a sudden I was a photographer. Before that I wasn't. I was an artist who took pictures. But that was going to be shown with Kappa and Gerdataro, and it took me like, weeks to digest, that thing. So it happened, and it was fantastic. And then the other thing that developed also very early on was a friend of mine, Ebba Hanhart, said, Francesc, there's one thing in New York that you have to find a way, no matter how, to get in and see it, because it's right down your alley. It's absolutely phenomenal, extraordinary, and sooner or later somebody's going to, do something with it. So better you, but you better move. And what she was talking about was Hangar 17, which was a hangar at JFK in the cargo area that had been empty for decades. And after 9/11, very, very early on, another one of those cases in which, think, well, it's fortunate that there are people who really, think in a particular way, and very early on. It was very clear to a small group of engineers from the New York and New Jersey Port Authority that there were things there. That was just immediately after it happened that had to be preserved. When the first time I went, was like with a special permission. It said, well, you can spend the whole day here if you want. No cameras. You're under the radar. Somebody asked me if you've been here. I'll say no. And I entered that, and it was just, it knocked me out. First of all, because I was already seeing a museum complete, and obviously what they ended up doing finally at Ground Zero doesn't hold a candle, to that hangar. That should have been the museum of 9/11. The problem was that it was lost in the middle of JFK, difficult access, and of course it wasn't. It wasn't going to work out, but it was phenomenal, unbeatable, and it had grown like a mushroom almost by itself, with very expert help from special people. Before I got there, just right then, the 9/11 museum was created, as an entity, and that was crucial. Because I had an interlocutor. When I talked to them, I already had done the field work in Burgos, and I had all the pictures they had taken. So I said, this is what I've just finished, and it's going to be, it's going to be open very, very soon, and it dealt with this subject. So they knew that I was already had, experience in, dealing with subjects of this kind, which in a way, they mirrored each other, the two projects in a very strange way. It was like an inverted symmetry. In the case of Burgos, we were looking for people, and we knew that we were going to find people. 146 of them, and in the case of 9/11, it was the opposite, because the people actually in the head of everybody had vanished. There was no photographic record. There was nothing. And the very little of it that existed, it was removed from media. It was shown. It wasn't shown at all. I know that the police had photographed everything, around the wreckage, but that was never shown. So the idea that a catastrophe of that caliber was left without visible victims to mourn, it was. It was just it was surreal, And in the case of Spain, there were victims to mourn, but they haven't been found because they were covered, by a pile of dirt and earth. So they said yes immediately, and of course, if I had approached them as individual artist, maybe it would have worked just as well. But the idea of having the, to say, no, I'm right now at NYU at the center, and I'm doing this, this work. I'm there, doing a workshop, and we're doing a project, and blah blah blah. It probably gave me more sort of specific weight in the first contact, with the institution, with the museum to be. It ended up being presented also at ICP a couple of years later, and it was titled Memory Remains, which has double meaning. Memory remains, or remains of memory. So that when we tried to translate that into Spanish, because it was shown in several places, and in Spanish doesn't work that well. But it was okay. The most significant anecdote, as far as I'm concerned, and because it was one of these things that it happened, it could have not happened. It was just it was totally improvised. When I arrived, one thing that I was shown was Jim that actually took me to the Timeman Library. At that moment, everything was happening, all at the same time, all together. The Timeman had received the archives of an American organization that had been operating in Toulouse. It opened in 1939, immediately after the retreat, and stayed in business until the 1980s, which is just amazing. And their mandate, their mission, was to help the Spanish people that had left the country in 1939. And so it was. I walked in there, and the whole wall was covered with boxes, and big boxes. And inside of the boxes, there were like thousands of documents. In each one of them, these little folders, and each folder was one person. And Jim said, "Well, yeah, here, that's your project." And I said, "No, if I go into if I plunge into this, I'll never get out. I mean, this is the rest of my life." So anyway, I remember one letter, and it was in the box of Milton Wolfe's archive, and it was a letter by Hemingway, and it was a response to him. So by reading the Hemingway's response, you could more or less make out what Milton had, told him or written to him. And it seems that Milton was reproaching Hemingway that he had gone, warm on the issue, that he wasn't really, doing everything that he could, and and then he wanted to do this, obviously, again, it's the reconstruction, in a ideological tirade, and in which at one point he must have said that Marxism was a scientific method, scientific thought. So Hemingway responds saying, "Okay, now you're a scientist, you prick." I mean, it was incredible. I mean, I wasn't really prepared. There are a lot of stuff like things like this, but you're not conscious of them until you dig into archives. Things like this, it was like no end in sight, and. So I asked. I think that Juan Salas also was with us, and I asked, "But are you doing anything? Are there any projects? And I said, "No, just that's what I'm saying." Jim was insisting. Why don't you just take over that? Really phenomenal, really incredible thing. Too big for me, because as I said, if I had started with that, I would have spent the rest of my life with those boxes. And I couldn't do that. There were letters, from Hannah Arendt and from Camus, giving support to that organization. All kinds of really very significant material. Yeah. Along with the workshop and everything else, I also organized some talks. I recall one specifically at the auditorium of the center with John Heinhardt and Arthur Danto, and I think that we talked about art and history also, and multimedia installation, and and multimedia being a narrative device that lends itself very well, to deal with historical subjects, and then there was another one done under the auspices or filtered through the Center for Art and Architecture. On one hand, I was arriving at the center with a long trajectory. So, but the consequences and the repercussions were these two pieces that I think that in terms of timing and even on its own merit, they're decisive in my career. I mean, it's like when the question comes, what are the projects that you find, more, significant, or that explain, who you are and what your career is or has been, all those years. I mean, these two always appear, and most likely it would have been a different story if I had not been, at the center.